Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Future of Wine Tourism webinar. We're just going to give attendees a few minutes to jump on board as Anarette, my fellow Destineer, gets us ready for the first session. The tourism industry globally is suffering unimaginable losses, and wine tourism, which is the lifeblood for many, has come to a grinding halt. Loss of current business and the anticipated costs associated with future-fitting businesses with new health and safety regulations mean that thousands of jobs and many businesses are at risk. My name is Mariette du Toit-Helmbold, and I'm the Chief Destineer at Destinate, and it's my privilege to be facilitating today's and the following 2 days wine tourism webinar. Our aim is to present a webinar packed with practical and thoughtful guidance, advice, and interventions that can assist the industry gear up for a future where our freedom of movement and our human interaction is forever and fundamentally changed. So we hope you enjoy the next sessions, and we're welcoming attendees literally from all over the world, as far afield as Chile, Portugal, Spain, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and of course South Africa, being the majority of attendees. Welcome, everybody. We're going to jump straight into the first session. And the first session looks a little bit at how do we start preparing for a new era in wine tourism. And we are joined by Sisa and Ntshona from South African Tourism, Margie Whitehouse from Wesgro, Marisah Niewoudt, the wine tourism manager at Vinpro, Charles Buck, legend and wine tourism pioneer and owner of Fairview and Spice Route, and then Haggie, founder of Explore Sideways. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
So, Sisa, over to you, and to kick us off, million-dollar question. Can wine tourism and tourism survive COVID-19? And what is the most likely scenario we're working towards right now?
Yeah, good day, everybody, and thank you very much for having me on board. It's always good to share insights as we move along. Look, certainly tourism will recover. The form and shape of the recovery is, however, that is still outstanding, that is still being shaped on a regular basis. But there's just some key emerging themes that are coming through, and it's not just for South Africa, but globally, that essentially the recovery will be led by domestic initially, then regional, then international. And all of this is really premised on people regaining confidence to be able to travel again, you know, and they're not knowing what lies out there. So the first part is about people just going out to open spaces, visiting friends and relatives, and just really getting the social interaction going, and then exploring further and further. And that's kind of how we see things moving, you know. What is not clear, however, is the timeline in between, and also as well what the pandemic environment is looking like. So best case scenario is a vaccine is found tomorrow. I think you'll find a very good and a quick restoration of the sector. Or if a vaccine is still delayed, which is probably, then we start to talk about the with COVID environment. Now, as far as South Africa is concerned, we've got a potential double whammy of positive news, right? We are currently at level 4, and the president did talk about that he'd like to see the country move to level 3 by the end of the month, subject to some negotiation and interactions and engagements with various sources. So that's on one side. Then on the other side is that the sector, which was, still is, but they rated at level 1, meaning that essentially tourism kicks in at level 1, is still in place. However, is that the sector has taken upon itself to introduce certain health and operational protocols that aim to de-risk it. And done correctly, and if accepted, and I do this with my hands, you could see tourism being re-rated from being a level 1 risk to a level 3. Then that's a perfect storm of the two meeting together. Then you'll see the first bits of easing and allowing of tourism to come through. And I think that's what we are all keenly looking towards, and that's what we're all working towards, because we want to see the first elements of movement. Then you can get a better gauge of what's working, what's not working, and how we're actually moving to that side. Then just lastly, the caveat around that one is that both sides, both from a country perspective, is that you're going to see an unpacking at the country levels, not only at the global level of a country, but even a provincial level. And even some circumstances, you start to look at district level, right? So therefore, the logic behind it goes that those districts that actually have a low infection rate surely should not be treated as those that have an epicenter, high rate. So you'll see the country be mapped out in green, yellow, orange, and red, essentially. And then you start to see probably some green belts starting to kind of flow through. Then similar in the other side, when we look at the sector, it's aggregated at the moment to be called tourism, but we all know in there's certain different levels of activities. If you just look at transport as an example, and you look at aviation, surely it poses a very different risk from, road transport or rail and everything else there. Then you start to see it being staggered up. And then the combination of the two, if I had to give an example, is that in a province like Northern Cape, I think we've got 30 incidents as an example and 0 deaths. That is probably the most liberal space that you'll kind of find in terms of tourism be allowed to happen. Then you've got the problematic epicenters, Joburg, Cape Town, Durban, and Ntshona, which also coincidentally are also the economic hubs. You got to put that into the mix and have a view that says, well, if you open up tourism but keep those ones closed, what is the impact that it has, in terms of the entire sector? So let me put it there for now, but I think we are all looking bated breath to see as to the next couple of days how those shape through. As I said, at the moment is that the protocols are being consolidated by the private sector, which will be presented to government via the Minister of Tourism, who then presents it to the cabinet or command center, and then those get formally adopted and promulgated.
So a complex situation to be navigating, and I think this is one situation where we are all in the same boat globally, and COVID-19 has been a great leveler. Whether you're a third world or a first world country, you are touched. Margie, from a Wesgro perspective, you have been fighting to help the industry, particularly from a wine perspective, with getting our exports back on track. For our attendees from around the world that might not know that in South Africa there has been a ban placed on the sale and also initially on the export of wine during lockdown, which has brought some additional challenges to the wine sector. So Margie, just talk to us a little bit about some of the support that you have done from Wesgro to help the industry get back on track.
And greetings to everyone. You see, I come appropriately positioned with what I wish was a real glass of wine behind me, because we are wineless now. So yeah, thanks, Mariette. I think what has been interesting in the learnings, and whilst the focus of this is tourism and wine tourism, I think the interesting thing that we've learned about lobbying and the submissions will talk to and give us all some insights into all the lobbying that's being done now. The risk-adjusted strategy that Sisa was referring to, the lobbying that has now gone in on a level 3 basis, and we will up the ante in levels 2 and 1 to see how much more we can accelerate the return of tourism, and that's wine tourism. So I think the key lessons that as Wesgro we learned was that working through your association is critical. The government will listen to an association, which is why it's fantastic to see now TBCSA firmly taking the reins, because the association is representative. Whereas if big corporates think that they can go in and lobby, it is not seen as representative in terms of meeting the needs of the entire industry. So it was really important that those associations that went in together and showed what the economic impact was, what the global impact was, and gave very clear and very simple objectives about what they wanted to do it and how they wanted to do it, and in a way that actually de-risked the whole process. With all the supporting document and having clever media support, not media support that just talks about, why it makes no sense, but rather to say how it could make sense in a real world. When those submissions came together holistically, whether it was the first wine pass, and then we had a couple of issues in terms of transporting wine, so it was shut down again, and the second wine pass, and things like boat building as well. We've seen real successes in lobbying. And we are delighted to see the work that TBC is doing with SA Tourism to pull together holistic summaries of what we can do as as a sector, and how we can de-risk that sector and how we can go forward. Because if we're calm and focused and collected about it, I think we have a very real opportunity, given our president's clear message to us last Wednesday night that he is looking at opening up the economy. We have a very clear directive. So what has happened has really been a combination of great work. Marisah can talk to you a bit more about it, and I've seen the submission she's put in now for level 3, which is superb and pulls together all those kind of elements of what is needed to be done.
Thanks, Margie. Marisah, talk to us about the submission that you've done and why wine tourism is such an incredible cog in the economic wheel in the Western Cape in particular, but also obviously for the rest of South Africa and globally, how important it is.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mariette. Well, wine tourism is a significant, like you've said, revenue generator for the wine industry and the South African economy. We contribute 6 billion rand to GDP, and directly at farm gate, we create 11,000 job opportunities. At the moment, like most of the tourism sector, and like you've said earlier, we have come to a standstill. With the exception of our accommodation establishments who are serving quarantined visitors and essential workers. And I'm very pleased to say some of our restaurants that are reopening and some of our delis that are reopening. So the first thing that we wanted to do as a collective, and to touch on both Margie and Sisa's points, it was very important for us from the get-go to be coordinated. So the SA Wine Routes Forum, which consists of 19 wine route managers, a representative from WOSA and a representative from Margie's team, we all got together, set up communication channels so that we could make sure that the same information, the correct information, got to all of our members and that it got there quickly. So that was the first thing that we did in our COVID response. And then the next was to look at mitigation. What was our industry's needs from a business continuity perspective? So to get that information, we sent out an online survey that 104 wineries completed over the course of 3 days. And from that, we learned that 80% of our wineries could operate at a reduced capacity from a financial point of view. Those same wineries, the majority of them would need less than 10 staff members to operate. And they also really demonstrated in that their readiness to reopen and their absolute commitment to health and safety protocols. And that extended to arranging private transport for their staff members so that they're not having to take public transportation. So the next step was then, in terms of recovery, was to look at how we could reopen, working with the services schedule. And that, in terms of that, we listed all of the various services, wine tourism services along the value chain in line with level 5 to 1 in terms of when we thought they could reopen. And all of that information we could then capture in a report that we submitted last week to the TBCSA and sent to Margie's team as well. Thank you, Margie, for that. Just to demonstrate how we could de-risk some of the wine tourism services and facilities simply by moving them a level up. And also to demonstrate that we have the right health safety protocols in place. Stellenbosch Wine Route had those protocols signed up for all the different businesses in the wine tourism value chain. And just on a practical point, all of our industry members listening right now can keep an eye out for an email that's coming out to them this week, where that information will be sent out by your respective wine route manager. So that has really been, Mariette, our focus from the get-go.
Great, Marisah, and a lot of work happening behind the scenes, obviously.
Yes.
And I think it's so important, to be quick off the mark because, there's such panic initially, and to be able to start giving people some real clear guidelines so that we can just crystallize and start being able to see our way through the fogginess. We are navigating very uncertain times, but as entrepreneurs and pioneers, we've never really operated in a certain world, have we, Charles? And I think it takes a real pioneer to be able to overcome a challenge like this. So as one of the forerunners of wine tourism with Fairview and Spice Route more recently, what has the impact been of lockdown and COVID-19 on your business, if you look practically? And what do you think our collective response should be in terms of supporting the wine tourism sector to survive and recover? What do you need most right now?
I think, morning everybody, I think the most important thing during this period from our perspective was to protect as many jobs as possible. Because that's going to be a long-term problem that we're all going to sit with after this thing has disappeared. So our prime objective was just to do that and try and keep people working. And I was of the belief that people at work are almost safer than being at home. So we created a safe working environment, made sure that as soon as we possibly could, got everybody back into the workplace. I think secondly, what has happened this crisis has put emphasis on producers to come up with new and better ideas. It's almost accelerated the evolution of wine, and especially wine marketing. And we're going to see a whole lot of host of new ideas stemming from this catastrophe. So I'm very optimistic about the future, and I've got a whole suitcase full of new things that we're busy unpacking at the moment, and we're going to really spoil our consumers with a whole lot of new ideas.
That's wonderful. And I think we need that spirit of optimism and hope. A crisis comes with opportunities as well. And it's important to be able to keep creating, as I say, so that we can take those opportunities and make something of it. Ian,
I think
sorry, Charles.
I just think this has fast-tracked the industry. We're going to see a completely new industry evolve from post-COVID.
Absolutely, absolutely. And perhaps it's a good thing in many ways. You know, there's a lot of, we've perhaps been quite slack in embracing some new technology. Some of the sessions in the next few days will go specifically into some of the trends in online marketing, on virtual reality, and how do we balance human interaction with technology, and perhaps particularly as smaller businesses, how can we use this time to get online and be ready for, certainly from a South African perspective, when our market opens. So we've seen huge growth in online sales in markets like America, Australia, and the rest of Europe. So I'm sure that is to come for us. Thanks for that, Charles. Ian, Charles has alluded to that. We can expect big changes in travel behavior and the way in which people choose destinations and brands. We've already seen major changes over the last 5 to 10 years as social media and the web, and of course fear, has overcome many of us. And fear now is a more present reality in our lives than ever before. What are some of your predictions in terms of wine tourism, and how can that start helping us to prepare for a new era?
Thanks, Mariette, and thanks for having me. I think I kind of like to look at it in a short, medium, and long-term view. I think the short term, unfortunately, is quite closely linked to how the virus will or how people's responses to the virus will play out. You know, if your borders are closed, then the borders are closed. You know, that's unfortunately the way it is. I think you'll see as borders begin to open, people will look to how certain destinations or regions responded to the virus, and they'll be using that in their decision-making process. I think you'll see a lot of focus on obviously hygiene and the protocols that people are using and how people are communicating how they have responded to the virus. Virtual experiences will become, or have already become, more and more important in how people access information about particular brands or producers that they like. In the medium term, so that's the short term. In the medium term, there's sort of new market opportunity based on the timelines of the reopening of other countries' borders. You know, when is the US going to open their border, or the UK, or you know, I've heard of bubbles or regional bubbles being opened on different continents. Is that maybe something that we could look at doing here? Definitely the increased use in technology and innovation in the, as Charles was saying, innovation in the marketing space, marketing and communication space. Unfortunately, less events in general, I think. I also think that there'll be a closer collaboration with the travel industry, travel and tourism industry, so that we can work together to come up with solutions to different challenges that we face as a result of the virus. Yeah, I think, and finally, visits will be based on travelers' trust in the destinations that they want to go to. You know, what is their confidence in how those people have responded to the virus in general, I think.
And just to add to that, you know, you've alluded to the word trust, which is going to be our most precious commodity as we move forward. It's already climbed in ranking over the last few years, and we know that people will not travel anywhere and stay anyway unless they can trust and visibly see evidence of you know, their health and safety being a priority. Visible evidence, obviously the visual elements become very important. What are just one or two ways in which the industry can now already start instilling a sense of trust in their audiences?
Some things that I've seen people doing already is communicating the ways in which they're responding to the virus, first of all, how they're helping educate their employees and the staff that will be at those destinations, what they're doing in destination, sort of at the whether it's a restaurant or a wine estate or a cafe or whatever it might be, is making those protocols visual, you know, or visible on site. You know, the same way that if you go to an airport, for instance, you know, I think the airline or aerospace has always been an industry based on safety. So I think safety and how you communicate that safety and those protocols is becoming more and more important. So from a physical in-destination response, you know, making those protocols obvious and reminding people how they can stay safe. And then in a digital space or a communication space, getting the message out there that you are safe and secure and ready for sort of open for business.
Great. Sisa, do you want to add to that before we get to the next sticky issue?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to add on to what Ian was talking about, the trust part. And it's absolutely important because if the sector rushes to open up without having done the pre-work of building the trust, we'll all be dressed up and nowhere to go and no one's coming through on the other side, right? That becomes quite important. The trust is also that we have to instill to the powers that be, you know, government in itself, that they need to trust us as a sector to be able to do what's best for the country, balancing jobs and also balancing the livelihoods and lives of people, essentially. And by that, I mean a couple of things, is that work has to be done. You know, where I sit, I wish I could get a date that says, listen, the opening of the sector is this date. Then we could collaborate and work backwards to saying, what do we need to do in order to prepare the public, to inform and educate, you know, in terms of what does, to instill that confidence that you are and can take your family with you, you know, to go and stay at a lodge, to go in a specific event, that there's certain protocols that are there in place, and to really translate them into easy language that people can understand and thus can actually walk around with confidence. Similarly, on the other side, we also have to, and by the way, it's not a if we open up, right? Rather, when we open up, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There will be certain incidents that occur, right? Now, it is how you recover and give confidence to government that A, you are able to track and trace, you have mitigating circumstances that you can put into place in order to curtail it, right? The last thing government would want is to be able to allow a sector to open and then new pandemics start to kind of flickering all over the show, right? And I think that installation, and it may require, by the way, the with COVID tourists to give up certain liberties, you know, civil liberties around access to their movements, around recording of their movement at every single point. So if I go to an event, you know, do I sign in some form or manner? Where obviously it's done when you stay in accommodation. And, you know, all of this data information is collected so that if an incident does occur, you're able to track and trace, essentially who was there, and to ring fence it to those people. And I think that trust element, both sides, from consumer and also the regulator, we've really got to work quite hard and instill that.
Correct, a very important point. While we have your ear, Sisa, domestic tourism, it's obviously going to be the first thing that recovers, not just here, but globally. Unlike many destinations around the world, South Africa, we don't have a strong domestic tourism culture because of our past. For many people, travel is a complete luxury. It's just something that doesn't enter their frame of reference. If survival is your main priority, tourism doesn't come into the picture. But it's been interesting to see the discussions on social media, and people, those who can and want to travel, are yearning to step out. There's a desire to reconnect with their favorite places, with their favorite people. So how can the wine tourism sector in itself best reposition itself to attract more of the domestic traveler? I think for obvious reasons, we know that wine and wine tourism is often perceived as something exclusive, something for people, reserved for a certain segment of the market. And also perhaps, it's not necessarily that accessible for many people. What are some of the tips that you can give the industry right now to reposition themselves and look at wine tourism from a fresh marketing perspective?
Yeah, I think the key thing is really getting to the mind of the public, the consumer. And it's a difficult one, because I certainly, business will always be centering itself around solutioning for the consumer. That's ultimately who pays. But however, I think you've got a consumer who may have certain desires, but does not know what they want. And I think these will change on a weekly basis as we go along. So we are all camped up at the moment, and there's a desire for freedom to kind of walk out there and explore this country in all the open spaces. But there's also the other reality, that South Africa is in, junk status, is that many people's jobs are actually under pressure, that disposable income is not at the level that it should be at. And I think once those realities start to kick in place, then you'll start to see some difficult decisions being made. Certainly what we are trying to do is to almost do a dipstick every 10 days or so in terms of what's on the mind of the consumer. What this information does, it'll be so valuable, because it'll actually be, almost the gold, the nuggets that the industry can use in order to shape itself to this new, or to this with COVID customer. Because we can't assume that when the sector opens, that everything will resolve back to what it was, right? We all move into a new space. And I think we're feeling our way cautiously through it, but we just don't know. And we'll have to make it up as we go along, backed up by data and surveys that actually start to shape what the new customer is looking for.
I love the idea of it forcing us to be more responsive and making the customer the center of our decision making. So often, we've been quite one-dimensional in the way in which we plan for tourism. So Margie, you wanted to add to that before we get to the next point. Can you share some more insights?
Thanks, Mariette. Just to build on that, I think talking about, following on what Sisa is saying in terms of information, Expedia always has access to growth of what is being searched and who's searching, where they're searching. And this week, the Monday feedback this week was the first time that we've actually seen travel search coming back into the forefront. So from a South African perspective, it was interesting, because actually searching us, the top search came from the US, which is kind of indicative of the fact that the US feels like they're open and they feel like they're available to travel. The second was the UK, and South Africa came in third. So our domestic searches in terms of what people were looking for as potential trips and holiday came in third. So there is some work to be done there, but it does start giving us some hope, which is, I think, one of the things that we desperately need as an industry, is just some form of hope. So we're seeing that through, and we're seeing a little bit of a stimulation of growth. Interestingly as well, the majority of searchers aren't putting any date to them. To Sisa's point is, if we could have a definitive date, that would be fabulous, but nobody's having a date. So the majority are looking at like 90 to 180 days out. And these are the kind of things that we need to continuously monitor, because it is also critical information for us to share and lobby with to government to say that there is interest in travel, internationally and domestically. So I just wanted to add that point while we were talking about the specifics around the international travel there.
You talk about the importance of instilling a sense of hope and opportunity within the sector. So what are, in your opinion, some of the top opportunities and advice that you can share with the industry as we get ready to receive visitors? As Sisa said, it's not a if, it's a when.
So everybody out there is better equipped certainly to answer that question, because it's all the information that we're getting from our tourism industry that is allowing us to build our recovery plan. It's not some Wesgro office or some South African tourism office sitting working on it all. The one good news I have, and it's lovely to see Catherine on our webinar, is that just before, literally on the 20th of March, just before we went into lockdown, we joined Great Capitals of the World. Great Wine Capitals. Sorry, Catherine, I got your brand wrong. Great Wine Capitals, which we haven't, and maybe you can join in the chat and tell us when we last were. We haven't been in there for a couple of worlds. So to those colleagues of ours from Chile and Australia, from the Napa Valley, from Germany, from Argentina, from Spain, we are firmly back in what I believe is a critical group that allows us to not only collaborate in terms of opportunities or share information through this very difficult period. They're doing some phenomenal work and some great webinars as well, talking about how we can come together as a united wine team and be able to work on some very, very innovative ways. So that was just incredibly great timing. And that to me is hope, because here we are creating a network that we absolutely should be part of and now rightfully are part of, and are able to leverage on that as when our wine world reopens.
That's great news. Thank you, Margie. And, you know, I think more than ever before, this collaboration is the thing that's going to get us through collectively as an industry. Our world, you know, we are reminded just of a session like today, just how small our world has become and how interlinked we all are. Marisah, on that point of collaboration, which regions are you collaborating with in the moment in terms of exchange of knowledge, sharing best practice, and what are some of the key focus areas that you see coming through, and where should we be focusing our energy as destinations working together to solve this problem collectively?
Yes. Thanks, Mariette. Well, because we've rejoined the great capitals of the world, as Margie just said, I've had the great benefit and opportunity of sitting in on some of those discussions. So we'll have webinars like this one, 2 or 3 weeks after COVID, where we have wine routes, Napa, Bordeaux, Adelaide, Porto, a number of the famous wine regions in the world join in on the conversation. So aside from the collaboration that we have domestically as the SA Wine Routes Forum, we can share with our international counterparts. And our situations are quite different because South Africa, in a way, is a couple of weeks behind the rest of the world, behind Europe and behind America in terms of where we are with the pandemic, because when our first cases were recorded. So they're a little bit further along talking reopening than we are, but there's definitely been some common areas that we're all focusing on. Everybody's first priority when we sat down and we signed up for our webinar was how we sustain our wine tourism value chain. To Charles's point earlier, our biggest priority is to make sure that as many of our wineries and as many of our winery employees and our tourism employees come out of this crisis with their business and their jobs intact. So that's also why there's been quite a big focus by all of us looking at the revenue streams that we could activate first for South Africa to get our exports back up and running. And then to move closer to getting online wine sales for delivery or click and collect up and running, because that cash flow is so needed right now to carry our tourism services and facilities while they are dormant. So that's really been everybody's first priority coming out of the gate. And then, much like we've discussed here today, everybody is initially looking internally at the domestic market. We're fortunate as a collective, looking at all 23 wine routes, 3 provinces, that about 70% of our tourism is domestic. If you look at Stellenbosch, Franschhoek, Constantia, the picture's a little bit different. It's more 50% domestic, 50% international. But when we look at our domestic segment, it's a high yield segment, and it's largely intra-provincial. That's the segment that is, to my mind, likely to recover first, and it's very low risk. So if we could, for our wineries, just open up our domestic day tripper segment, that would already be hugely beneficial. And then the third area that we've also touched on and spoken about quite a bit today is an increased investment in online marketing and direct to the consumer, or D2C channels. So a lot of wineries and a lot of wine routes are putting their budget and their know-how behind CRM, their online wine stores, their wine clubs, their tasting room hospitality and sales. We've seen locally a number of our wineries host virtual tastings, they've done online cooking classes, webinars, and then Franschhoek Wine Valley has just moved the Bastille Wine Festival online. So there's going to be quite a few interesting developments happening in that space. And I think we should, if we look at the sectors of wine sales, our channels that will unlock first, then online looks very likely. So how do we prepare our wineries for this? I'm working with my good friend Robin from Australia, who you've got on the schedule for later this week, Mariette. I'm working with Robin at the moment to pull out some of the D2C content that we created for the wine tourism toolkit that we developed together last year. We're putting that in a newsletter with some webinar links to get that out to our industry members, just so that they start looking at the opportunities to gear up their online presence and their online sales channels.
That's excellent, Marisah, and some very good pointers there. And Charles, you alluded to having a couple of great ideas in your suitcase lined up. And not all of us are blessed with your level of entrepreneurial spirit and creativity and innovation. And I think you're right. You know, we're going to be seeing an incredible amount of innovation coming through. We are seeing innovation happening and people reaching out to each other. I think from my perspective, one of the most important things that we need to do during this time is build communities and networks. You know, we speak about this incredible value chain that wine tourism creates and the number of small businesses and entrepreneurs and individuals that it supports and nurtures. So a great, obviously, initiative is to make sure that we set up these networks, because back to Ian's point on trust, when people start traveling again, it'll be wonderful to be able to travel within this network of businesses that are like-minded and that you can almost pass people on to each other with great care. But, you know, from your perspective, what, you know, in preparing for this new future, what should businesses in the wine tourism prioritize right now? What should be the first 2 or 3 things that they get right now and focus their energy? It's sometimes very difficult when it's so blurry and so upside down to focus. But, you know, you've got your suitcase of ideas ready. But so what has helped you in terms of focusing on and putting one foot in front of the other to start coming up with a plan of action to get you through COVID?
We haven't got enough time to get through everything, but just to put in a nutshell, we must look at what attributes we have as producers that our competitors don't have. And one thing we do have is space. And what we need at this point in time is space. So look at taking your restaurant, decentralizing it, having little areas where people can picnic, break it up. Even in the winery, utilize the square meters amongst the tanks or barrels, have tables sit out there. Even take food to the car in the parking area. I mean, the wine area, parking areas are pretty places and people can walk around, they can eat in their car. So we can look at doing things completely differently. I think what has happened is that we mustn't see wine tourism as a singular thing. People are not going to take the trouble to drive out to go to a wine tasting room anymore. You'll have to offer a lot more than just wine. And I don't want to sound like I'm punting Spicewood at the moment, but there we made a collective of artisanal producers, crafters in a whole range of fields. And I'm very happy to report, if you look at Spicewood today, it reflects the demographics of our country. And which is amazing to see when I walk around that part of the facility, and I see people from all walks of life and all shapes and sizes, all shades. It's very rewarding to me to know that tourism does exist in South Africa for the majority of South Africans. We just haven't got the product mix right yet. And I think the Spicewood is getting very close to that. I also think that we're going to see a complete shift from traditional products to more organic, more natural wine, more environmentally friendly wines. And I think that's a trend that we have to take on board now. It's going to be beneficial to serve the market in the short term, but it's going to have long-term benefits on the environment as well. And that I think that is the main driver that's going to push the wine industry into faster evolutionary change moving forward.
Excellent, Charles. I mean, I think there's some real pearls of wisdom to share with the industry. I love the idea of being able to use this time to plan for a better way of doing tourism. So not just wine tourism, as you say, but also really looking at our impact on the world. I think
just to come back to local tourism, you know, a lot of high rollers leave the country to go to destinations all over the world. We're going to see a lot of those people staying at home now. So there's a growth going to be at the top end as well. That's also very important that we cater for that market moving forward.
You're right. And then there should be that strong message. It's okay to stay closer at home for the next few months. And what is the offering? How do we start repackaging and being creative about how we package and not just fall back onto the traditional way in which we used to do it? We need to really rethink.
And I just want to add one last thing, that, you know, we don't value the tourist that takes the trouble to come and visit a wine farm enough. And that is an absolute jewel, a gem of a person that takes the schlep to come from Cape Town to visit the wine farm. We should really value them more than I think the wine industry does at the moment. And we are very fortunate that we formed a wine club over the last couple of years from the visitors that we get at Fairview. And this month has been my busiest month ever because I tapped into that resource that I built over the last couple of years.
And do you think, before we get to Marissa's addition, do you think it's too late for businesses to start things like wine clubs now? Do you think it's a good opportunity? You know, how do they go?
I think you're on the back foot. You'll just have to be a bit more inventive and resourceful with the ideas and deploy a little bit more intellectual capital than the people that started some time ago. But it's never too late to do anything. And I think wine clubs and incentive schemes and all kinds of opportunities are there. For instance, we just did a promotion whereby you bought wine now, but for every day you wait for me to deliver it due to the lockdown, you get 1% discount on your order.
I like that.
And it sort of started an online gambling thing and infused that with Wine Story, and it was amazing success. So we can't keep up with the packing of the orders. Just hope the lockdown opens quick, because others are going to bankrupt us.
Excellent. Marissa, can you add to that?
Yes, Marie, thank you so much. I just wanted to add to that. To Charles's point, I read an article yesterday by Destination Think where they just summarized it so nicely. They said, you know, we need to start thinking in terms of recovery. We need to mitigate, then we need to reopen, then we need to reimagine our sector. And I think that third step is really important. What we've done very well in the South African wine industry is that we're leaders in sustainability. We're the only country in the world that can actually put a seal on our wine that vouches for how ethically that wine was produced, and that can account for the vineyard block that bottle of wine comes from. I think there are some really nice lessons in what we've been able to do with wine that we can apply to wine tourism. I think Portugal has just launched a safety seal for their tourism offering that they're putting on their tourism businesses. So so to Charles' point about sustainability and about having space, we have all the right ingredients as a sector to reimagine something quite amazing. And if I can add, I just want to add one more thing on to wine clubs. The beauty of wine clubs and the domestic recovery that we're potentially looking at. And if we look at international, my sense is that we're probably going to see recovery first for repeat travelers. The opportunity there lies in the fact that we know these people. We have relationships with them. Somewhere in your business, you have their email addresses and you have their orders and you have their wine preferences. So it's not starting from scratch. It's just continuing a conversation with an old friend for when they can come and visit you again. And I think there's something like quite positive for me in that as well.
I love that, Marisah. And you know, the wine tourism industry, it is really such a personal industry, isn't it? It is really about connecting people. And the great thing is we get to connect over good food and good wine. And it is time for us to get back to the roots of what tourism is all about. And it is about personal connections with places, with people, and with ourselves. And as we venture into this next few months, it's important to realize that we are all connected by this. Nobody's lives have not been touched. So the very things that we're afraid and anxious about is what our audiences and our consumers, our customers are anxious about. And I think it's really important for us to bring this category down to earth and have the conversations. I think one of the most important things going forward is going to be that people, our travelers, would want to visibly see the good that their visit can do in terms of a local community, in terms of a region, in terms of the environment. And there's a far greater consciousness that will override any other desire to travel. And I think that could lead to beautiful things. From a tour operator perspective, Ian, and the game will change. We know that buying behavior will change. We know that we will be seeing a lot more direct business coming through. How are you gearing up as a tour operator for the future, and what are you putting in place right now?
Well, I've written a few things down here that I think will kind of indicate how the game will change for operators. I love this talk of collaboration and connectedness. I think that's something that we've tried to focus on as a business. The idea of purposeful travel, family travel, people wanting to travel for a reason rather than just for sort of fun or being frivolous. I think first and foremost, just going back to what I think there's been a common theme from Sisa and one or two others, is that what we have to do as a tourism industry is build trust, right? You know, and our industry is based on trust and relationships, so that there's an opportunity for us to develop that trust through collaboration. One of the things that I know we've focused on is, from an operator perspective, is flexibility, booking flexibility, or people are going to need security on their deposits, or know that there's a flexibility on their deposit when they actually book a trip in the first place. And that, I think you'll see that flexibility is going to be needed throughout the industry. And that's really one of the aspects of collaboration that we can focus on, I think. We have set ourselves up for, I think that we're going to see an increase in short notice or last minute bookings, especially in the short to medium term. So be ready for that. Be able to respond quickly, stay agile as an operator, as a business. I think you'll also start to see a bit of a shakedown in the industry. You know, so the great shakedown. You know, you'll see a lot of operators will unfortunately fall along the wayside, or they won't necessarily make it through. Some of the operators that will stay in the industry will potentially change their focus or move up the value chain. So I think you'll see a bit of changes there. You know, we're thinking of new product. What's the new product that we can put together? Is it and again, going back to that collaboration, is it coming up with more or sort of more interesting packages or experiences, collaborating with places like Spice Route and Charles or other destinations to create experiences at these destinations that are safe. I mean, I think that safety is obviously a big concern, but also allows for that connection that we're talking about. What is the reason people are going to visit your destination, other than just good wine and good food? And then what did I say here? Oh, well, I've got. I agree with Charles. I think there's definitely going to be, the luxury space will always exist, but I think you'll see people that have money will want to travel, and they will be looking for those types of experiences that they can spend their money on. And again, those are the experiences that are going to be safe, and it's going to give them something unique, something different, and provide that connection that they're looking for. And I guess a lot of that boils down to how do we market our destinations and our regions, and how can we collaborate in order to do that?
Absolutely. I think the key focus here is stepping outside of our comfort zones and outside of our segment of the sector. And we need to see wineries, tour operators, restaurants, experience operators working closer together. Sisa, on that point, please add some more thoughts for us.
I think just Charles ignited something when he talked about the high rollers. You can see he's a betting man over there in terms of how he's putting some of the things together. But I think he's absolutely right. And it's about just being obsessed with the consumer, and we've got, again, here, two things. One is that you've got an exchange rate that is very prohibitive for South Africans to leave the country. And secondly, as well, the borders are closed. So you kind of then, you look at this audience that would have left the country, the outbound, and how do you repurpose them in terms of, internal expenditure? At Destinate Tourism, we have got this theme that we've created and developed for ourselves, that through this lockdown period, we're doing everything in our powers to gear ourselves up for the future, right? It's all those things that we know we should have done. We just delayed them a bit. Technology advancements, our data collection, so that when the gates open up again, we are right there at the front end. At the same time, it's also important to keep an eye on what's happening around the world, and we are listening all over the show. Because what the sector has to do, it has to be agile and actually almost recalibrate its business to being able to doing business profitably in a COVID environment. Yeah. Here's what I mean by that one, is that certain of the protocols being put in place will place restrictions. So when you are told that you can't have more than 50% capacity at your establishment, but yet you are operating at 100% expense, you've got to start to relook at your pricing, as an example, for this to make sense. So, at what level do you stop making profit and start making loss? And what level do you break even? And you've got to look at all of those so that you can hit that sweet spot. You increase the prices too high, you take out a certain segment, you keep it too low, it becomes a problem. And just finding that right spot, in terms of what your new maximum capacity is. And I like making an example of the airline as an example, right? Someone flying from Joburg to Cape Town, if the domestic airlines are kept at 50%, they're still burning the same fuel, right? So suddenly now, you're paying for the empty seat next to you, and that will be incorporated into your price. So suddenly now the cost of moving around goes up incrementally. And I think we have to just make ourselves aware to be agile and be able to, figure a way around it. But you can only get that. Otherwise, we can simulate until we are green in the face. When it opens up, we've got to tweak and change, and all is adjusting all the time in order to make sense to the new normal that we get.
Absolutely, and as someone just said on the comments, thank you, Rory, for that. Is the key words being safety, space, and trust, and how do we incorporate that into our messaging, and really, as you say, Sisa, rethink and use the time now to gear up and be very pragmatic about it. Margie, please add your thoughts to that.
Great. I just wanted to chip in there, following on from the whole conversation about the high rollers staying at home and what we're doing about that. So while there's, and I'll talk a bit about it later if we have the opportunity, a bit about the focus on survival, we are certainly building the Western Cape and wine tourism in the minds of the South African high roller who's going to hopefully roll all the way down to the Western Cape. So you'll see there's been a series in Wanted, which has got a really interesting reach. And we actually started off that series. We're doing it very under the cover, but we started it off featuring Mpumi and Langiso from Magna Carta, talking about his version of wine tourism and what he was doing in wine tourism. Nobody even knows that it's ours. So, I mean, I'm disclosing it here, but just keep it undercover. We're just trying to do it quietly. We followed that up with Katlego Mkhlambu, who is the head chef at Marabi, but was trained and developed in the Western Cape, talking about his Western Cape and his wine favorites and his sommeliers. And we're quietly just building this whole story to making sure that we keep presence and top of mind in the whole of South Africa, so that when the high rollers start rolling, they'll roll to us because we know we have a highly desirable product. And there's one other little project, because I think we tend to focus on the specifics and we don't look at the hopeful messages. We know that the tour guides are one of the hardest hit in our industry, and they really are battling. A lot kind of have no access to UIF, even if they could get paid by UIF and tours. So we've done a whole little series of virtual tours with our tour guides, where the majority of the Wesgro money is actually going into paying the tour guide, and we're using a little virtual Google mapping, Google Streets, to be able to show them through the tours. And at the end of it, we're opening it up to tipping through PayPal and SnapScan. And we're taking that, there'll be a couple of wine tour guides, because all the regions, as they've seen it, are all coming on board and saying, but can't we be part of this? Can't we all support our tour guides? So our RTOs, our LTOs all coming on board. And in a great way, we'll just have a couple of 100 tour guides who've actually made a bit of money and, importantly, positioned this beautiful offering that we have to the rest of South Africa and to the world. So they're cute ideas that are coming forward.
That's it. Practical, keeping it real. Thank you, everybody. We're coming to the end of the session. Any last thought or pearl of wisdom to share before we wrap up and remind our attendees that our second session today at 2:00 will be focusing and putting the spotlight very specifically on our target markets and the domestic markets and our wine tourism experiences and how we repackage those experiences. And we'll be joined by a great panel, Tapelo Mokunu from Nero, Char McCoy, a sommelier in New York, Hein Kuchlenberg from Lamotte, and Professor Robin Back from the Rosen College of Hospitality Management, and Toby Rose, a influential travel influencer here from South Africa. So please join us for that later. As we wrap up, any last comments on the future?
Mariette,
yes.
If I may, while I was listening to everybody's comments, a question I have is from a wine route perspective, a wine route office. Obviously, having run a wine route office before, your income stream is from members and from sales, and then obviously wine tourism events. And I know that that must be a major concern for wine route offices, is their survival. Marisah, maybe if you want to chip in, obviously, I've seen that some wine routes are in trouble. I think it's important for wine route offices to exist. We're talking a lot here about collaboration and about spreading the message and marketing messages of trust and safety. And in my opinion, it's extremely important for wine tourism offices to exist, but it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. If the wine producers are struggling financially, they can't contribute to a membership organization. Do you think they're going to survive, and is it important for them to survive?
Sure, can I take this one?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Anarek. That's a really valid concern, and it's one that I share with you. Margie saw my proposal that I put forward to the TBCSA, and one of the areas that I actually asked for support for was exactly this area, because I have the same concern that you do. Most of our wine route managers or officers are also LTOs. They get their funding from local municipalities who are, for the most part, cutting budgets because they're redirecting funds to relief efforts. Then, like you've said, the rest of their money comes from commission on walk-in bookings. in the information offices and major events, none of which they can run at the moment. So I don't have a direct answer for you in terms of how we're going to help them, but what I can tell you is that I have asked for help for them, and that somehow if we could look at some kind of support for their operational costs, just to see them through these quiet months. Because I agree with you, I think they're fundamental to the work that we do for collaboration. And because in South Africa, tourism development generally is bottom up and not top down. So infrastructure, service, all of those budgets sits with the LTOs, and the responsibility sits with the LTO. So the responsibility sits with the wine route office. So if we don't have them, it would severely impact our ability to serve our members, but also to develop sustainable products, because they're the guys who pull the communities in. They're the guys who know the local guides, and they're the guys who make sure that the events are inclusive in terms of local communities. Fortunately, so I don't have an answer yet on that request, but we did foresee it as a challenge, and we share your concern. And we have put a request out to see if there's any kind of resource that can be made available to the teams.
Absolutely,
Thank you, Marisah.
Thank you for that, Anna-Rete. I think if you look at the conversations we've been having this morning and the importance of pulling together a community and collaborating, those are potentially very important hubs for establishing a new local tourism experience and being able to put it out to the local citizens, to the world eventually, and being able to feed that information to the likes of a Wesgro or a regional tourism body or a provincial or a national tourism body. So we hope that a way can be found to sustain those offices. Thank you very much, everybody. If there's any last thoughts, please share that now and join us for this afternoon session. I want to thank our panelists. I think we've had a really robust and good discussion this morning. There's obviously a lot that we need to go and think about and process, and we look forward to sharing some insights with our attendees and our panelists post this webinar, and all participating in finding ways in which we can navigate our way into this new future and not just survive it, but prosper. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.